Ukrainian troops are trying to hold off Russian attacks in much of Ukraine's east. The Kremlin aims to capture the industrial Donbas region, but many observers say that Russian gains are smaller than expected. Ukraine has admitted heavy losses in the east, but says Russian casualties are far higher. Evidence of Russian brutality has shocked Western officials, even those with military backgrounds.
As the war in Ukraine drags on, emotions run high in the Pentagon.
It's hard to look at what he's doing in Ukraine, what his forces are doing in Ukraine, and think that any ethical, moral individual could justify that. It's difficult to look at It's difficult to look at some of the images and imagine that any well-thinking, serious, mature leader would do that. So I can't talk to his psychology, but I think we can all speak to his depravity.
The besieged city of Mariupol has had it as bad as anywhere.
And any photos that you have...
Far away in Italy, the wives of 2 Ukrainian soldiers still fighting there desperately await news. Their husbands are among those left in the last outpost of Ukrainian resistance in the city, the Azovstal steel plant. Close to 1,000 civilians also continue to shelter there as Ukraine seeks ways of getting them out. But these women hope their husbands' lives can be saved too.
We think that Mariupol have to have a chance, and not only civils. We come here to rescue alive soldiers too, because
Conditions within Azovstal are believed to be dire. But in these pictures released by the State Border Guard Service of Ukraine claiming to come from within the steel plant, fighters keep their spirits up as they sing the national anthem. And these pictures might provide a further morale boost for Ukrainians. Released by the country's National Guard, they claim to show missile strikes on a Russian armoured military convoy near the eastern city of Izium. It's one part of the battle for East Ukraine where most of the focus is now. The Pentagon says Russia's attempts to seize control of the Donbas are well behind schedule. But Western officials have warned that the fighting there could last months, if not years.
With the prospect of a lengthy war and reports of heavy losses, I asked DW correspondent Emmanuel Shaz in Lviv what the mood is among Ukrainians.
Well, Eddie, I think when we listen to the words of Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, he acknowledges that the losses suffered by the Ukrainian side are great, but he also said that it's nothing compared to the Russian losses, which he says are colossal. And I think that just gives you an idea of the spirit which really animates the Ukrainians, not only armed forces, but also civilians. Here in Western Ukraine, we relatively spared the atrocities that we've been seeing unfolding in the eastern part of the country, or even in Kiev suburbs in the months of March. But nonetheless, this is a country which is entirely at war. Here regularly we get airstrikes, alarms. Last night at midnight, they resonated again over Lviv. Nowhere really feels safe in the country, but there's one thing that's for sure, is that Ukrainians are not giving up on this fight, and there's a great spirit of resistance throughout the population.
Okay, so not giving up, but is there any hope for evacuations from the besieged Azov steel plant in Mariupol?
Well, the matter of evacuation, especially of civilians, has been raised time and again this past few weeks. We've talked about humanitarian corridors again and again, and every time the negotiations stalled, and that is largely due to the fact that Mariupol is constantly being bombed, constantly under shelling, which would not allow for safe evacuation. And there's a lot of NGOs who also cannot access Mariupol, saying that what is needed is not an evacuation corridor, but a ceasefire of 24, 48 hours that would allow civilians to get out of town. You know, before the war, Mariupol was a city with 400,000 inhabitants, and it's believed that 100,000 are still stuck there. And on Friday, we got those very staggering figures given by Mariupol's mayor of 20,000 civilians, Mariupol residents, dead since the beginning of the Russian invasion.
So, Emma, no one wants a prolonged war. Has there been any progress on peace talks or ceasefire?
I wouldn't be very optimistic on that. And if we listen to, again, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, he himself isn't very optimistic about it. And again, this is down to the fact that there's no ceasefire, that especially eastern Ukraine keeps on being shelled, even as negotiations are ongoing. So he himself warned that the peace talks might fall through once again.
Emmanuel Shaz in Lviv, thank you. On March 4th, 8 days after Russia invaded Ukraine, Russian forces took control of the largest nuclear power plant in Europe. The Russians have kept their Zaporizhzhia plant running with Ukrainian staff. But there's been reports of Russian troops forcing engineers to work under extreme pressure. There are also concerns that fighting near the plant has caused damage or could cause a nuclear accident. Ukraine says Russia sent 8 specialists from its state nuclear company to the plant, where they demanded managers give them confidential data about its operation. The head of the IAEA has urged international nuclear specialists to be granted access to the plant as soon as possible. Mariupol isn't the only major Ukrainian city under heavy assault. For weeks, Russia has been relentlessly bombarding Kharkiv, the country's second biggest city. While many people have left, others remain.
Close to the front line of Russia's new offensive, Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, is coming under attack. With infrastructure damaged and homes in ruins, life here is hard for those who remain. Today they turned off the water, he says, and we've been without electricity for 2 weeks already. American volunteers are helping to train the city's emergency services, who are struggling to respond to the constant demands of war. In his nightly address on Friday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky said there is no sign of the pressure abating. The situation is difficult in the Kharkiv region, but our military, our intelligence has scored important tactical successes. In Donbas, the occupiers are doing everything to destroy all life in the area. Constant brutal bombings, constant Russian strikes on infrastructure and residential areas. This shows that Russia wants to make this area uninhabitable. Hundreds have been evacuated from a village to the north of Kharkiv. Russian forces were driven out of Ruska-Lozava after a month of occupation. There was relief for many when Ukrainian soldiers arrived.
Before, when the soldiers entered actually our village, our soldiers, I remember I saw them on my street, and I actually, from the video, and I actually cried, but it was a grateful cry because I was really glad to see them.
Relative safety for now, perhaps. But while Kharkiv remains a key battleground, lives continue to be uprooted and destroyed.